If you love Push Black's Black History Year, you'll love our newest podcast called 2 Minute Black History. In only 2 minutes, you'll hear little-known stories about our people and reclaim the knowledge we need to take action and advance our community. To move towards the future, you've got to look to the past. Learn the history you didn't get in school. Tune in to 2 Minute Black History every Tuesday through Friday, right on the Black History Year feed and wherever you listen to podcasts.
You've seen the infomercials. Hundreds of millions across the globe are starving. And while the US media paints a portrait of hunger being oceans away from America, the truth is, millions are starving in our own backyard. I'm Jay from Push Black, and you're listening to Black History Year. Food insecurity is a bigger problem in this country, in our community, than you may know. 1 out of every 4 Black kids is affected by hunger, and 8 out of 10 of the top US counties with high food insecurity rates are at least 60% Black. What exactly is starving Black America, and what can we do about it? The work of today's guest might be the answer. Jasmine Crowe-Houston is an award-winning social entrepreneur and determined leader working to make the world a better place, one cause at a time. In 2017, after years of feeding people experiencing homelessness from her own kitchen, Jasmine launched Goodr, a sustainable waste management and hunger relief company that leverages technology and logistics to help its partners reduce their food waste and provide meals to those in need. Get ready for an interview that'll nourish your mind and spirit. But first, here's some important context to understand what our people are up against in the fight for food security.
Black health has declined significantly in the past several decades. Medicine will chalk it up to poor diet choices, but they conveniently ignore that for many of us, poor diets have been forced on us. Open any medical journal and the message is the same. Black people are largely unhealthy. We have the highest rates of obesity, hypertension, and heart disease in the nation. These studies mention how food plays a part in each of these illnesses, but they frequently leave out one important factor. Structural racism has ensured that many in the Black community live in low-income areas with high levels of unemployment. This snowballs into the perfect environment for food insecurity. Nearly 20% of all Black people live in food insecure households. Food deserts, areas with limited access to healthy and affordable food, are often found in predominantly Black areas. Our neighborhoods are filled with convenience stores and fast food restaurants, and we often travel over a mile or more to find a grocery store. This means the food many of us consume is inherently unhealthy and leads to the devastating illnesses many in our community face. And the more political redlining happens, the worse it gets. We don't have to let these intentional anti-Black policies eat us alive, however. Self-advocacy and pushing for change in our communities can seem small, but starting small can still lead to massive movements of change.
What does Black liberation look like to you?
You know, Julian, that's a great question. And when I think of liberation and what that means to me, I think it just means to be lifted and be celebrated and be in a different space. And a lot of times when I think of the Black community, in many ways, yeah, we're liberated, but in many ways, we're still suffered. And so what I'm really trying to get us to is to the point of being able to release and understand that everything that we've been through is in the past and our future's in our hands, and that there's still so much more for us to do. But it is very great to think about where we've been. But where are we going? I feel like is even sometimes more important. We're setting ourselves free from where we've been. And now it's where do we go?
Completely agree. While it is important to understand the history, we like to think of it over here as a learning tool. How can we learn from it, use what we can to move forward in the direction that will be positive for the entire community? So, a lot of our definition is rooted in self determination and defining ourselves. And I'm curious about how your work connects to the vision that you shared of Black liberation.
Well, it's interesting. One of Bob Marley's songs, there's a really great kind of quote within that song. And he says, in this great future, we can't forget our past. And a lot of times when I think about the work that I'm doing, I think about the past. I mean, even going back to the Black Panthers and their free breakfast program, which has been used in schools today for generations, not really understanding where that came from. And so here I am, a Black woman trying to solve a problem that affects people that look like me 10 times greater. And a lot of times, yeah, I don't get the same resources as the large organizations do, but my focus is trying to really set my people free from this vicious cycle that we've been placed into, which is going to food banks and food pantries, oftentimes getting boxes of food that we don't eat, that is bad, that will not prepare meals for our households, and trying to get us to a place of dignity, the dignity that we so richly deserve. So I think when I think of liberation, how do we set ourselves free from the way that hunger has always been solved and be open to a new way of doing it? And that's what I'm trying to do at Goodr.
Speak a bit more about the old way of doing it so we can understand more about the new way. So I think when I hear you say, you speak on food banks and food pantries. In what ways would you say that they have served the community? In what ways could they be doing better?
I spoke about this in 2019 when I gave a TED talk, and it was met with, some positivity, but for certain, a lot of adversity. And people would say things like, food banks do great work, and I've volunteered at the food banks for years, and they're very, instrumental in feeding millions and millions of people. And no doubt, food banks are necessary, and they have been around for a very long time. But what I point out is the fact that they have not solved hunger. They have created a system of pacifying where they're giving you a little and you still have to come back to get more and you have to go to this location. But what a lot of people don't know is that food banks receive billions and billions of dollars. And a lot of times that doesn't trickle down to the nonprofit organization that is distributing that food in a manner of a food pantry, like a local church. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the very large scale organizations that get hundreds of millions of dollars to provide food to people. And yet people still go hungry. I talk a lot about being in Atlanta and being a Black woman. And for many people that don't know this, Black women, as it relates to funding, receive very little, less than 0.5% of all funding. And in the same year when I was struggling, but still feeding, millions of meals to people in need, I learned that the local food bank in my city had an operating budget of over $100 million and had received over $100 million in donations. And I was like, wow, like how are they getting $100 million? And here I am taking a million and doing so much with it and trying to make sure that I push this to get out to families so that they don't have to worry about access to food. And what the realization is that hunger is not a scarcity issue. We don't need to produce a lot more food in this country. We waste 72 billion pounds of perfectly good food every year. I have found that it is largely a logistics issue and that there's a big difference between access to food in this country and access to meals in this country. And when I say that, I'm talking about getting a box of food that doesn't marry together, getting spaghetti noodles, but no spaghetti sauce, getting peanut butter, but no jelly, no bread. How do we make it so that when families do need food and they do come into contact with your organization, that they are getting the food that they need to last themselves at least a week, 10 days, so that they can save that money that otherwise would have had to go to food and put it towards something else that actually gets them out of poverty. And that's the model that I've taken on, is that every time someone interacts with me in my company, I'm going to give them 7 to 10 days worth of good food that's not expired, that is new, that is packaged in the way that it would look like when you went into a grocery store, because I keep your dignity in mind at all times. And I'm going to allow you to pick out the items that you know you're going to be able to prepare in your household, and the items that you know your kids or the senior citizens that you may be a caregiver for are actually eating. And so that's what's been wrong with this system for a long time. And I think what has always made me really upset about it is how much money is deployed every year to address hunger, yet how many people that look like me are still hungry.
So what stands out to me in hearing you speak is this dignity aspect, which is something that um, I'm not sure if I viewed it in the same way before I started looking into your work, where it's like, I think there is this expectation that, okay, well, here are these little mishmashed pieces of food, and the people who are receiving them should be, there's the assumption, I think, they should be grateful for having anything, as opposed to having that dignity of putting together whole meals instead of just pieces of food that don't match. So I think that's powerful. I'm curious as to how you came to that understanding that that was an important aspect of what's needed as well.
I began to spend a lot of time, working in volunteering in food banks and seeing kind of the things that we were giving to families. And I was thinking to myself, what are they going to make from this? I remember one food bank distribution, we were literally giving these families a gallon of barbecue sauce. And so you think of a gallon of milk. Here we go. We're giving these families a gallon of barbecue sauce, no meat, no produce, nothing that was fresh. They were getting a bag of kettle potato chips, two canned vegetables. There were like some superhero shaped macaroni noodles, some Weight Watchers ding dongs, and maybe some French fried green onions. That was the other thing that kind of goes on top of green bean casserole. But as I sat there and must have made 80 to 100 bags that we were giving away to these families, the whole time myself and the other volunteers are just doing this. And I don't know if they were thinking it as well, but I was thinking, what are these people going to make from this? Like, what are you going to take home and make? And there were about 80 people in line at that event. So I saw it for sure.
That's incredible. A gallon of barbecue sauce. And it's wild to think about, because that's like something that, if you walk out into the street, you'd be like, okay, you would see like a dog lapping up a open bottle of barbecue sauce. You don't. That's not something we should think that, okay, a human can do something with this, and just this alone. So I'm curious as to, as you've been in these spaces and seeing how folks have not been respected or treated with dignity, in what ways that revealed itself, racial element, as you were interacting with the folks that are involved with the sort of the structure, this traditional structure, and the folks that are receiving the services.
I think the way that I've tried to focus on it again is that dignity first piece. And so a lot of times it's going into communities that people that don't look like me, who for many, many reasons get all of the money to do this work, they're not going to go into these communities. I remember for 3.5 years, we served food in a area of Atlanta, which the apartment complex has since been closed by the mayor and the federal government, that was right behind the US federal penitentiary. And I could tell you that for the years that we were over there, I never saw anybody that didn't look like me trying to come over there and feed those kids and those families. And so that's why it's important for me as a Black woman to do this work, because I'm going to go where my people are and make sure that they have access to food. And the reality is that 1 in 3 Black kids don't know where their next meal is coming from. And I think that that is a systematic approach to even racism. It goes back to redlining, right? We've got Black people living in communities that are food deserts, that they're not near a grocery store, and then we are rationing them off, small amounts of food in these ways that we're talking about with the food banks. And how is that going to solve hunger? It just keeps people always being in need. And that's what I think is a big issue.
Do you think that's the nature of this, like just a result that it keeps people in need, or have you seen evidence of any intentionality behind that?
I think now that I have said some things and they have, gotten some far reaching comments and response, I think people are going to start changing how they are serving families. And I think you're going to see a lot of more dignified pantry models where you get to walk into a food pantry now and pick out items instead of getting a box of items. So I think that that is important. I do think that, again, the root cause of hunger is poverty. And as long as people are not earning a fair living wage, as long as, for example, in 27 states, I believe in this country, it could be more, that if you have a felony drug crime, you're not able to get food stamps, you cripple the children of people that are returning citizens trying to get their lives back on track. Now, you as a parent, you can't get SNAP food stamp benefits for them. And now you have kids that are hungry based off of mistakes that you made, could be 10 years ago. And so there's a lot that needs to be done because there's no reason to me that any one organization in any city should have an excess of 100 million something dollars and people not have access to food at all times. That's critically wrong to me.
Goodr is not one of those organizations. Uh, I'd like to know a bit about what Goodr is all about. So if you could give us a high level for our audience, and then we can dive deeper over time.
Goodr is a tech startup, and we are a sustainable food waste management and hunger relief organization. We started in 2017, really under the goal to feed more and waste less, which became our mission. So, on one side of our business, we work with large scale businesses that usually have a lot of excess food that goes to waste. And we help them divert that food from landfill, and food that's edible, we're going to get it to people in need in our nonprofit network. Food that's not edible, we're going to help them recycle it, such as composting, turning it into animal feed, so that they are better stewards on our environment and in their communities. And we give them back a lot of the data on how much of that food is going to landfill, how much of that food is being recycled, what of that food is turning into meals and for who, how much tax savings they have for their food donations, and how they are improving their carbon footprint. But then on the hunger side, we're really focused on working with large scale brands and even cities and other municipalities to rethink their food insecurity strategy. Are For the last 50 years, you've always given money to your city's food bank, which is great. What other opportunities are you looking at? How are you making sure that seniors have access to food, that children have access to food, that working families have access to food when they are in their darkest hours? And so we create a lot of solutions. We build free in school grocery stores. We also have a mobile grocery store that we could pull into any food desert and bring families food for free. Our food is always free for those who need it.
You mentioned that it was important for you as a Black woman to be doing this work. I'm curious, as you've interacted with folks, can you describe some of what type of effect has that had on your ability to execute on your mission?
The response from the community is always so uplifting. People, have literally cried when coming into our stores or on our mobile grocery store and just said thank you. I never will forget receiving an email from an older senior, and she said, "Thank you for giving me meat that wasn't brown." It was so refreshing to have fresh food and to be able to put food in my pantry and come home and cook myself a meal that was good. And so I think a lot of people that interact with us at Goodr love what we do, and respect it and respect the work that we're trying to do.
How else do you see this work differentiating in terms of getting folks to to experience that dignity, that liberation that comes with food security?
I think I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that that more people will adapt these strategies. Of course, I don't want people to steal like our IP and the way that we've kind of built our company. I'd much rather every organization that's trying to address hunger does it in a way where they put dignity first for people and they don't give people items that are knowingly bad that they want to eat themselves. They always told us treat other people how you would want to be treated. And that needs to be the same in the space of hunger as well. You know, I was recently at a conference for the African American mayors of this country. So I heard the mayor, Sylvester Turner, who's the mayor of Houston, Texas, and he described that within Houston, there are literally communities where the life expectancy is 25 years lower because of no access to fresh food, no access to produce, no access to a good grocery store or a healthy restaurant. And because of that, this country is more sick than it is healthy. And so we've got to start addressing these gaps as it relates to how we're solving hunger in this country.
Those gaps also relate to the narratives around food insecurity and hunger. Talk to me about that aspect of it and what the challenge has been with addressing that narrative in the work that you do and the way that you speak about the work.
I think the challenge has just been really the funding. Hunger is not something that's going to be solved easily or quick or cheap, and I think having not as much access to funding as some of the large hunger fighting organizations has definitely been a detriment to the advancement of where we're trying to go, but I feel really confident that at some point it will still happen.
Are there any concepts or initiatives worldwide that we could be looking to as models to borrow from here?
In France and Italy, for example, it's illegal for businesses to throw out food. They have to either donate the food or, compost it, recycle it. So they actually get fined for throwing away perfectly good food. I think that's something that would be great in the US. We're starting to see some states introduce legislation surrounding this, mainly in New York and California. But again, it's not yet being mandated. So that rollout's going to be further along. I also love in Denmark, they have grocery stores where people pay what they can. And I've always loved that model where they basically gather food that otherwise hasn't been sold. So that could be from farmers, from other grocery stores, and they put it in these pay what you can stores where families could come in and pay what they're able to. A local, US example that I've always loved is the Daily Table, where it's affordable items, but they also freshly prepare meals that families could come in and buy that are affordable. And these are models that I think should be in every single city, as I think Goodr should be in every single city as well. But that's something I think we definitely should try.
Let's actually take it back around to just this concept of Black liberation. In order for us to even think about fighting for liberation and securing liberation and advancing our interests, we got to have our basic needs met, right? Food being one of those needs. And from my understanding of history, it's like if a people is just focused on getting their basic needs met and focused on survival alone, they're never really able to explore those higher parts of life, to think different types of thoughts, to have time to think about how to build civilizations and advance the interests of themselves, their families, and community. So I'm curious, from your perspective, once the bellies are full, so to speak, then what is the next step in terms of the road to liberation from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think you're correct in saying that there are so many other problems that families are worried about on a day to day basis that it takes precedent, right? You can't worry about so many other things. We want to talk about generational wealth and closing the wealth gap, but if you are often worried about just how you're going to eat tonight, how you're going to feed your kids in the morning, that stuff takes precedent. And I think if we can solve this problem, then I think for sure, there's a big opportunity to get ahead. I was at a conference last month, and I was heartbroken to see them get on stage and actually present, I guess, that Black women had a net worth of $100 compared to white women having a net worth of nearly 30,000. And it just blew my mind that, my people are struggling like this, but it shouldn't have, because I realized that, the communities that I'm serving in, there are people struggling to feed themselves. So it's no wonder that the net worth is $100 of our people. But I think that this is all in the plan. I really do. I think that as I go back to just the history and the redlining and how people are, being even moved out of communities now just for gentrification, and they're getting pushed out to more rural communities that don't have access to food and not as much access to jobs and transportation. I mean, it is really um, a system that's not built for us. And to the extent that we can, we've got to support Black businesses that are trying to do these things like what we're trying to do at Goodr, because it supports all people. And I'm not saying that we only feed people that look like me. We feed everybody. But what I can say is, having done this work now consistently for the last 8 years, people that look like me are experiencing hunger at higher rates. And that's just a fact.
I've been thinking for a while now that it's time to move that conversation or that rhetoric forward. At a certain point, it became empty rhetoric for me, because I think that it's not just the responsibility of, like, the Black community, for example, to support Black business, but in turn, how does the business support the community? In what ways are those dollars circulating through that business and not the business owner taking it and going somewhere else?
I agree. I mean, and I will say, we have largely been supported by our community. I mean, we'll post an event where we're going to be doing a food distribution, and it fills up in a matter of minutes, and it's been shared 100 plus times. And so that social media support and that kind of engagement support is necessary. But the support that actually moves us forward, I speak to, Black people that are working in positions of power within corporations, within the government, within large foundations, to really look at how they're allocating that money. If you've consistently done the same thing year after year and you're getting the same results, then I call that insanity. Like, if you're really trying to solve hunger and you're trying to change outcomes, you've got to change how you're funding. And that's where I think Black communities can support greater. And that's not just for me. I speak for thousands of Black owned businesses, that if the person at Target would give them an opportunity, or the person at Walmart, or the person at Amazon, whomever it could be, just getting them into the doors. There's not enough of us. It's great to have some Black owned companies on your shelf, but there's a Black owned company for every product that's sold. And I think a lot of times, leaders in Black communities, especially those that are like leaders within Black companies, they get afraid to sometimes always stand up and say, like, I'm going to be the Black person that pushes other Black businesses and brings other Black people to the table. And, I can understand that to some extent, but what we have to do as Black business owners is over deliver and stand up, like, so that if someone does give us that opportunity, we're making them look good, and so that they won't be afraid to take that risk the next time. And you got to wow people, and you got to, make that person who made that introduction, make them feel good and make them look good. That's the return. And you got to do that.
Jasmine, appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us on Black History Year.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
That was Jasmine Crowe-Houston, founder of Goodr. To learn more about her work, go to goodr.co. That's www.goodr.co. At Push Black, we agree with Marcus Garvey when he said, "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." We believe telling empowering stories on Black life and history can build a more liberated Black future. Being here with us lets us know you probably feel like that's important too. You matter. Your choice to be here matters. It lets us know that you value this work. And you make Push Black happen with your contributions at blackhistoryyear.com. Most people do $5 or $10 a month, but really, everything makes a difference. Thank you for supporting the work. Black History Year is a production of Push Black, the nation's largest nonprofit Black media company. Our team includes Tariq Alani, Brooke Brown, Tasha Taylor, Somalia Ramin, Amber Davis, and Darren Wallace. Producing this episode, we have Sydney Smith and Lynn Webb for Push Black, and Ronald Young Jr., who also edits the show. Black History Year's executive producers are Lily Workna and me, Julian Walker. Peace.